You may have read a series of articles in the Plaindealer this week under the title, The Inheritance. A young woman was living with the near certainty that she developed the breast cancer that claimed some of her relatives. She was perfectly healthy, but chose to have a double mastectomy rather than wait for the cancer to show up. A tough choice. Her name is Gabrielle Brett. Her mother, Regina, wrote the articles, and they're both with us now. The best way to start this, I mean, they were marvelous articles, but we can't capture them all, obviously, in the time we have, but why don't you just sketch out the story for me the way it occurred?
Well, the Reader's Digest condensed version here. 10 years ago, I had breast cancer, and at the time, I had lost 3 aunts to breast cancer, and then as the time went on, found out that in our family we have not just a history, but possibly a future of it because there's a genetic mutation that can be passed on by mother or father, 50-50 chance of getting it. I got it, and then we found out after I went through my treatment that my daughter had the gene, and she actually works for the National Cancer Institute, so she has done the research and has done a lot of prep to really make a decision. And unfortunately with this gene, it gives you up to an 85% lifetime chance of having breast cancer. And to be able to have the surgery takes that risk down to 3 to 5%. So for us, we saw it as a huge way to stop cancer before it started, so to speak. A lot of people maybe don't understand that decision, but Gabrielle can probably tell more about why she chose it.
I'm going to ask you that because I didn't understand it until I read the story. I'd heard about what the story was. And I thought to myself, can't you just go and get checkups more often? I mean, why would you want to do anything this radical? Well, you answered all these questions in the story, but certainly this occurred to you. I mean, you must have had a terrible time wrestling with this problem.
Yeah, and luckily I was able to meet with a counselor who kind of walked me through it and how to kind of let go and feel that all the emotions that come with making a decision like this. And one of the things she asked me was, do you feel like you have a choice in making this decision? And I said, yeah, I have 2 choices. I can wait and get cancer and then do it and possibly have to go through chemo or radiation, you know, multiple surgeries, or I can proactively make the decision to have my breasts removed through a bilateral mastectomy and prevent it. So I wouldn't have to go through, you know, chemo and radiation and treatment. And then that fear of, did it spread, you know, and what the next step is.
Is that commonly done, what you've done?
I think, well, the prophylactic mastectomy, I think, what was it, about 50 or 60%? 50
to 60% of women who end up having the gene have the surgery because most people don't have a gene for breast cancer. I think, what is it, up to 15% of maybe breast cancer cases?
Between 10 and 15% of all breast cancers are actually genetically based.
But the thing with genetics is they tend to get cancer younger and it tends to be more aggressive. So in our family, my 2 cousins were diagnosed at 35 and she was turning 30 this year. So it became, well, how long do you wait? Do you wait to get cancer or do you try to stay ahead of it?
You put in the story that that's one rule of thumb to go by is what's the youngest age any of the relatives had.
And she was the first of the next generation, which made it a mystery.
But the one thing I think we've got to go back and go over again because I think it's going to clear up ideas of a lot of people who perhaps didn't read the story. I hope you all did. But when I said, couldn't you just go back more often and get it checked, which would have been the first thing that would have occurred to me. Well, you went through a very painful process because you realized that even if you went in and got it checked and they found you clear, there wasn't much relief for you.
Well, and not only that, but one of the options that I chose to do was participate in a clinical trial. And clinical trials is basically a research study that they do on people and how it's not, there's treatment studies, screening studies, genetic studies, quality of life studies, there's all different options to participate. I chose to participate in a screening trial for high-risk women where they did mammograms, MRIs, clinical breast exams, and ultrasounds. And every single time I went for my screening, you know, the MRI is a very high, has, you know, very high resolution, very, very sensitive. So you get a lot of false positives with MRIs. So for 4 years I was in this study, and every single time I got an MRI or a mammogram or clinical breast exam, something came back abnormal. And then they want to wait a couple months to see if there's been any change.
Yes.
And those months are just terrifying because you think, oh my gosh, there could be something in there growing right now. And that anxiety was enough that the clinical trial was a 4-year study, and when that study ended, I didn't feel confident that there wouldn't be something in there, and that you get so much kind of VIP treatment in a clinical study where if you gain or lose 2 pounds, they want to know when and, you know, what the difference is. So I felt like I was being tracked so well during that study, and then when it ended, I thought, what's the next step? Going back to my providers that may or may not be familiar with the BRCA gene. I mean, lucky for me, I had a great breast surgeon who was phenomenal, but, you know, the mammography techs and everything, there was a lot to that they would have to deal with that they may not be familiar with.
There was a very touching part of the series, not that it wasn't mostly all touching, when you asked to see your mother's scars. Yeah. Tell me about that.
Well, I think once somebody, and you've said this before, once you go through breast cancer treatment, even before you had surgery, everybody, so many people see your scars and see your breasts, and it becomes this very sort of normal thing to share.
You're such a patient that you don't feel like much of a woman sometimes because of all the things
the different nurses and doctors that come in, and so. You know, so I asked, can I see them? And I think you were really hesitant because you didn't want me to be scared or, And, you know, it's pretty much what I kind of expected. And
it was great to see, too, that she was comfortable and she wanted to know and she wanted to go, okay, this is what I might look like someday and I can live with this and it's doable.
Yeah.
And the thing, too, we want to make sure people know that we're just talking about breasts. And as much as society glamorizes women and, my goodness, everybody has to have size D cup implants, they're just breasts. And when you're going to save your life by not having them, it's, I hate to say it, it's a lot easier of a decision once you say, okay, I'm saving my life here. I'm willing to surrender these.
Well, you pointed that out in the series. I'm glad you did because I get to repeat you now rather than introducing this subject. But it is a breast-fixated culture.
Oh, it is.
And I think, frankly, this year more than ever. I mean, no matter where you go, and you look around, you see more cleavage than you thought you'd ever see in your life and all kinds of things.
And the sad thing, the whole implant industry of actresses and models, you know, what happened to a woman just being herself? And so for Gabriel, you know, my concern as a mom was this is the decision that once you make it, there's no going back. And it was difficult to know that I've passed on that set of decision-making things to her through this gene.
Did you have any problem when you heard that she was going to write about this?
Oh, I kept saying, when are you going to write about this?
When are you going to write about this?
You know, I grew up her writing about, you know, prom and learning to drive.
Right.
And going off to
columnist
college.
daughter. You can't do anything without getting
like,
written
come on
about.
already, let's get it going.
But I never used her name. I always wanted to protect her pretty much from the public eye. And she said, I really want to share this. And part of it is your mission as a cancer fighter.
Working for the National Cancer Institute's Cancer Information Service at the local level, we're really, my job is to educate people about cancer and about risk reduction and knowing their family history.
Well, you're a couple of brave ladies, and I'm proud to know both of you
Thanks
now.
for having us on.
I met you just today. Thanks for coming over. If you missed Regina Brett's series, The Inheritance, you'll find a link to it on our website, WVIZ.org/Feagler. Thanks for tuning in. See you again next week. Just stick around for a while.